Hi everyone. I wanted to take a few minutes and do a screencast to help you think about developing your teaching philosophy statement. Before you continue, it might be helpful if you have another screen where you can do some word processing to get started, or just a pencil, piece of paper, something that you can write with as we go through and as you have ideas that come to you. It might be important to first think about, why do you need a teaching philosophy statement? Where and or how might you use it in the short term and the long term? Stop for just a minute. We'll pause and think about why you might need a teaching philosophy statement. So hopefully you had a moment to think about why you might need a teaching philosophy statement. A simple answer might be, well, I'm probably going to have one when I apply for jobs. I might need one if I'm applying for a recognition or I'm given some kind of a recognition in my school district. And that's true. But I think also having a teaching philosophy gives you sort of a guide, a compass for the decisions that you make in your teaching. It helps you to think about, for example, if an intervention or some type of program is introduced at your school, revisiting your teaching philosophy statement helps you, guides you, gives you something to compare that idea, that innovation to, and to think about, does it fit with the way I think about students? Does it fit with the relationships I want to cultivate with families? Does it fit with what I think about learning in my discipline? Those are some of the things that you might want to consider in terms of a teaching philosophy statement. I'm going to guide you through a few things here where it might help you to think about just getting started in that developing your philosophy. And the first, to me, is most important. What is the student's perspective? If someone were to ask your students to describe you as a teacher, what 3 words or phrases would you want them to use? Take a moment and on your paper or your word processor that you have open, write a few words and phrases, and feel free to pause the video if you'd like to give that a little more time as we go through this guided exercise. So for me, I've been teaching a long time, but I'm still thinking about what I want. And as my students change and the types of students I have, I think my words and phrases continue to evolve as well. I want my students to see me as rigorous but supportive. I want to challenge my students, but I also want to provide whatever support they need. I want them, as my teachers helped me think when I was in high school especially, that I can do anything. I want my students to believe that they can rise to whatever challenge, but I also want them to feel supported in that. And it might seem like a tall order, but I want to inspire my students to be the best they can be. And again, I feel like I had teachers who did that for me, and I know in my past I've had students that I feel like I really did make a difference. When I taught 8th grade especially, I feel like I really was able to push students and make them believe in themselves and in a greater, purpose for their lives. And so that's something I want to accomplish. And I'm still thinking about words and phrases I'd like to have my students say about me. So think about that. What do you want your students to say about you? Because then your teaching philosophy, how you approach your teaching, you can think about how you're going to get there. How are you going to get to that place where you want your students to feel that way about you or have that perspective on you? So it might be useful if you take one of those words or phrases that describes how you'd want students to think or feel about you and write a paragraph about your teaching. So if you want, I'll use my example that I want my students to think I'm rigorous or to feel like my courses are rigorous, but that they have the support they need. Take a moment and write from one of those words or phrases, and go ahead and pause the video and take some time to do that. Use first person, by the way, unless that feels too hard right now. go ahead and say I. I know it seems sometimes we're pushed away from that in academic writing, but if it's your teaching philosophy, it has to be in first person. Don't say teacher should, say I should, I will, I believe. So, another way that I like to think about my teaching philosophy so that it can be set apart from others is I like to think about maybe a quotation that inspires me or that is consistent with my view on teaching and learning. So, I've shared with you here on this screen something from my own teaching philosophy. And my teaching philosophy lately, I've been calling invitations and expeditions, but hardly ever destinations, because I don't know if we ever arrive at at our destination, some final place in terms of teaching and learning. I hope it's always something that we're continuing to do. So that's why I said hardly ever destinations. So this first couple of sentences of my philosophy begin this way. The first section is called Longing for Excellence. And I say, teaching is an invitation. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, sorry if I said that badly, author of The Little Prince, once wrote, "If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people together to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea." I love that quotation because it says that we don't just pay attention to the tasks that we do along the way, but rather we help students see where they're going and to long for excellence or long for the learning. And then we think about how we can get there. And so that's something that quotation often inspires me in my teaching. Is there a quotation that you can find that really inspires you or is consistent with what you think about teaching? You can pause now and do a little searching or make a note to yourself that you want to find a quotation. Maybe there are a couple words that you remember but you can't remember the entire thing. You can go and find it later. And then here's another one. Mary Oliver, she's a naturalist and a poet, and she once wrote, "What I want in my life is to be willing to be dazzled, to cast aside the weight of facts, and maybe even to float a little above this difficult world." And then she wrote, "Tell me what it is that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life." I love that too. And then I wrote a paragraph there that you can see that I've linked back to that quotation. So I say, "I'm worried that we in higher education have lost our zest, our spirit, our momentum and purpose to serve and understand the needs of humanity and our students. And yet I'm hopeful too. I see signs of a hippie spirit that embraces counterculturalism, and I am optimistic that the current generation of educators will reject the structuralism, standardization, and pessimism that currently have a stranglehold on public education in favor of a quest to honor and celebrate human spirit, intellect, and potential, particularly those characteristics of our students that make them so wild and dazzling." So you see that I tried to connect those quotations and then extend it with my own words about what it means to me. So you might think about that in your own philosophy of teaching statement. And then here are some additional sources of inspiration. John F. Kennedy once wrote, "The course of civilization is a race between catastrophe and education. In a democracy such as ours, we must make sure that education wins the race." And then I mentioned some of my own teachers and how their belief in me influenced and transformed my future. And then I write about the greatest source of my own inspiration, and that is my students. They hear me say sometimes that most of us choose to become teachers because we want to make a difference in the world and in the lives of others. That's why I became a teacher. But what will astonish you and catch you completely off guard at times is what a deep, profound difference your students will make in your life if you are willing to be dazzled. So you see, I brought that word dazzled back in because it really resonates with me. I want to be dazzled by my students, and I want to value their lives that are wild and precious. So you can also think of some people. Maybe there are writers or teachers, scholars, thinkers, artists, musicians who inspire you. Why do they inspire you? And I have a slide there with Mary Oliver again because she says, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. And I think in education right now we need more people who are paying attention to students especially, and to maybe even the political landscape, and that we're paying attention, that with our students we're astonished. And I mean astonished in a good way. We can be astonished sometimes in other ways too, but I do mean in a good way. And then education needs advocates, so we got to tell about it in whatever way we can. It might be that we tell our students, it might be that we tell families connected with our schools, but we have to do those things. So I included that because Mary Oliver often does inspire me with her poetry and her work. And then here are just a few other people. Parker Palmer, who wrote a book called The Courage to Teach. Atticus Finch, many of you read Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. And Atticus Finch, even though he's a fictitious character, he stands out as an inspiration to me because he taught generations of readers what real courage is. Gloria Anzaldúa, who wrote a book called Borderlands and came up with a construct called La Facultad, is something that inspires me. And then I have there some others that I've mentioned in a previous slide. And then here is a quotation by Robert Kennedy. I love this, so I'm going to take a minute and read it to you. Let no one be discouraged by the belief that there is nothing one man or one woman can do against the enormous arrays of the world's ills, against misery and ignorance, injustice and violence. Few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and in the total of all those acts will be written the history of this generation. It is from the numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man or a woman stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he or she sends a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. And I have to say, of late, in the last few years, this is what I think about. I think about this quotation in terms of teachers. That teachers sometimes in our own classrooms, in our own little corners of the universe, we feel so small. We feel like there's so little that we can do. But I love the hope in this quotation because it says that those little ripples of hope cross each other and then come together, and those ripples build a current. And that is what I'm hoping for in public education in the not-so-distant future. So obviously there are criteria for evaluating your philosophy of teaching statement in the course, and this is included and posted in the course, but I just want to draw your attention to these and make sure you spend some time with them. I want your philosophy statement to be authentic, written in the first person, avoiding phrases and jargon like all students can learn, in favor of language that feels authentic and real to you and that's original in some way. And hopefully that's enthusiastic. And enthusiasm can look different ways. I have people I work with who are real risk takers. One of my colleagues uses hissing cockroaches and trumpets and bicycles and pulleys and all kinds of demonstrations, and his enthusiasm is out there. Mine is a little more subdued, but hopefully no less authentic. Personal development. Your philosophy should show a sense of your own development and that you are continuing to do that and evaluating your own development and working toward improvement. That's what I was talking about with the hardly ever destinations. We all have something we can continue to strive for, and I think that sense of continued development should be represented in your philosophy. And breadth, it should address a range of roles, responsibilities, and aspects of teaching and learning at the middle level. You can think about the course topics in our course that we've covered about schooling, and students, and education, and teacher preparation, and begin to brainstorm a list of those topics. And you can refer to some others that are listed in this rubric, such as the next one, the student and teacher relationship. And this goes back to that student perspective on you. How do you want students to view you? What is the perspective that you want them to have? I want my students to see me as caring, but I also want there to be an academic, a real sense of, and I hope you take this the right way, I want them to see me as an intellectual, not to put me on a pedestal, but I want them to see intellectualism as something we're all striving for. That it's okay to try to be smart. I think more and more, and particularly at the middle level, that students sometimes are worried about trying to be smart, and I want them to feel okay about that. And so while I want to be very close to them, I also want there to be a professional seriousness about our relationship. What do you want that relationship with students to look like? What are you willing to do to get to that place? What are you not willing to do to get there? And then your philosophy should be actionable. So it should think about what might challenge you in your teaching. Maybe it's something because hey, I'm a softie and I think classroom management might be a challenge for me. Or maybe I'm disorganized and I know that I'm going to have to work on that. What are the things that might be a challenge to you, and how are you working toward encountering those challenges and then responding to them in meaningful ways? What's the action you're going to take as a teacher? And then finally, your philosophy should be readable. It should be well organized and reader friendly, concise, clear, and direct. It should be specific rather than abstract. Again, I keep pointing to that idea of everyone can learn. Well, that's kind of an abstract sort of idea. But what are you going to do as a teacher? What is the actionable thing that you're going to do, or series of things? What are some ideas you have right now about what you're going to do in order to make sure that all students in your class learn? And then if it's important to you in the student-teacher relationship that you really get to know them well, how are you going to make that happen? You can use some bullets or italics or headings to make the philosophy statement flow and to sort of point out things that are most important. Process. At the very beginning of the course, I asked you to begin keeping a journal, and that journal could be in the form of a wiki, it could be a Google Doc, it could be a word process document that you're keeping. It could be handwritten notes. But when you turn in your philosophy statement, you're going to turn in evidence of that thinking and reflecting over at least the course of this semester. So please, keep that together and be sure to submit that. And then finally, you should, as a professional, make sure that your writing is free from spelling, grammatical, and usage errors. Have someone else take a look at it. As a teacher, you're going to be sending communication home to parents, and sometimes, depending on where we grew up, how we've used language in our past, we may have some adjustments we have to make. I know I did as an English major, but coming from a very rural area. So you may need some help with that, with punctuation or something like that. You probably have a sense of that at this point in your graduate education. But do make sure that you've got that right. It's really important as you present yourself as a professional. So that's it. I hope this is helpful in terms of looking at the criteria, but also giving you some ideas for getting started on your philosophy statement. In addition, there is in your As You Learn course a whole web page dedicated to the development of the philosophy statement, and I hope you'll find those resources valuable. I look forward to reading your thoughts about teaching as we continue in the course and the semester.